Hello my friends, HM here. I make videos about topics that are important for whether the future of humanity will be better or worse. China currently makes 79% of the world's lithium-ion batteries that are critical for making battery electric vehicles, smartphones and portable computers. Moreover, China equally dominates the entire supply chain for making lithium-ion batteries, with the exception of mining raw materials for lithium. This is a huge security problem for the world, as China is well known for using its economic and military powers for intimidation of other countries. This video investigates supply chain with regard to lithium for making lithium-ion batteries. It also answers the question of how hard it will be to break China's battery monopoly and still be able to make enough lithium and lithium-based materials for making 100 million battery electric vehicles per year before 2032. With that said, let's get to it. Okay, so let's start this presentation here. So why should we worry about lithium use in battery electric vehicles? Well, the number one reason is that lithium carbonate is very expensive. A typical battery electric vehicle uses about 63 kilo of lithium carbonate and it costs $2,170. That's a price I calculated by the price of lithium carbonate by the 1st of April 2023. It is changing quite a lot. As you can see, I have the price chart here, so it's quite volatile. But in order to understand how much is that, it's just one little component in a battery electric vehicle and it costs $2,200 almost. How much does all the raw materials in an entire battery electric vehicle cost? That I have calculated in this table over here, where we can see a typical battery electric vehicle. It uses graphite for the battery, 100 kilo of that, then uses nickel, 45 kilo of that, then this lithium carbonate or equivalent, because there's also something called lithium hydroxide, but typically it's lithium carbonate, it's 63 kilo. And in terms of lithium metal, because lithium carbonate, that's a chemical formula for, I can't quite remember what it is. I think there's some carbon and some oxides in it as well as lithium. But if you just take out the lithium metal, then it compares to 12 kilo of pure lithium metal that's in the car. But the weight of this stuff is 63 kilo. And then we use copper, 91 kilo of that. We use some manganese, that's for the battery. Normally you also use manganese for other parts of the car, so there will be more manganese elsewhere in the car. Then we have some cobalt, so only 3.5 kilo of that, also for the battery. And I may say that cobalt is no longer really used. We used to use cobalt for battery electric cars, and we still do with many of them, but we are changing away to battery packs that doesn't use any cobalt in their batteries, so it's not that important really. And then rare earth. Rare earth is a group of elements in the periodic table. Neodymium is one of them, and that's the most common rare earth elements that are used in electric cars because it's used in the magnets for the electric motors, and we use only not even a kilo of that in the car, but it's quite expensive per kilo. It's $103 here, so it's still a little bit important. And then there's aluminium. We use 170 kilo of that. That's based on GM's Volt car. I'm pretty sure Tesla is using more aluminium in their cars because now they are casting the body, both the front and the rear, and it's casted in aluminium. So there must be more aluminium than 170 kilo there. Plus there could be some plate work that's also aluminium. And then we have crude steel. That's a ton. When Henry Ford started building cars almost 100 years ago, it was pretty much just steel. A car was steel and then some rubber for the tires and not much else. But now we are starting to use a lot of other materials. One of the other materials that we use a lot of is textiles and plastics. So 200 kilo of that. So if you add all that up, there'll be 1.7 tons for a typical battery electric vehicle. And then what I have done is I've gone out into the raw material markets and found the commodity prices for these raw materials, and then simply multiplied with the kilo times the price in US dollar per kilo. And then we have here a price in US dollar for needed material in a battery electric vehicles, and it all sums up to $6,200. So you can see that when lithium, that's just 63 kilo and it costs $2,200 almost. So more than 1/3 of the raw material cost in an electric vehicle. So that's quite a lot. I have also calculated what does pure lithium cost. So in 1 kilo of lithium carbonate, that I do have a commodity price for, that contains 189 grams of lithium metal, and that means that the lithium metal would cost $182 per kilo. And that's actually extremely expensive, because you can see here it's more than the price of neodymium that cost $103. And it's by far the most expensive element that are used in a battery electric car. But it was even worse. This lithium carbonate is traded in Chinese yuan, and on November 17th, 2022, it topped off at 600,000 yuan per ton of lithium carbonate. That would be the same as $90 per kilo of lithium carbonate, or $5,500 for what you need for a typical battery electric vehicle with a 78 kilowatt hour battery. 5,500. That's more or less all the profit that goes away when you make a car. And it is really an outrageous price, because lithium carbonate, I found sources from China, they say they can produce it for about 30,000 yuan, or $275 per battery electric vehicle. So nearly 95% of all the profit that's made from selling lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide, which is the other major way that lithium is used for making lithium batteries. I think lithium carbonate is used for making lithium ferron phosphate batteries, and lithium hydroxide is used for nickel-rich battery chemistries. So what we also know here is that only modest profits are actually made from mining or extracting lithium raw materials. That would be the salt brine that Chile is famous for making, and also spodumene rock that Australia is well known for mining. The miners there don't make a lot, because the Chinese factories who refine this into lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide, they have cost about 30,000 yuan, when they have also included the cost of paying the miners for raw materials. Okay, so why is the price of lithium so volatile, or specifically why did we see this 10x in price of lithium carbonate in 2021 to 2022, and subsequently it dropped 2.5x since November 2022? Well, one explanation is that incentives for battery electric vehicles, they were cut in EU and China in 2022 and 2023, so now less demand growth than anticipated by refiners of lithium. That might have explained that lithium started to fall here. But something we can see down here, we have a graph of the market share for battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles. It showed that from 2019, where the market share of these battery electric vehicles and plug-ins, it was almost nothing. It was less than 5% in all big markets, China, USA, and Europe. But then just 3 years later, in 2022, it has jumped to 24% for China, 19% for Europe, and 7% for the US. So what we could see here is that year that says 2021, where the lithium price goes up until the 2022 starts, that would be down here. That would be the phase from 2020 to 2021 here. There's a strong growth on all three markets here. So that could explain this price jump during 2021, because of the strong growth and demand for battery electric vehicles that require more lithium to be mined and also to be processed. And we can also see here in 2021, the mining of lithium went up from 82,000 tons of metal lithium equivalents to 107, and then it went further up to 130,000 tons of metal lithium equivalents. But for this year, that we can see on the European market, the growth in market share for battery electric vehicles simply stopped from between 2021 to 2022. That would be at this period here in 2022, where the price went sky high on the world market up to these 600,000 yuan. You could say when the price is that high, the European automakers wouldn't have made any profits on their battery electric vehicles, so they might have themselves cut down on producing them, because they are simply not profitable if they have to pay $5,500 just to get the lithium for these vehicles. And also other prices went up, so far bigger cost for making vehicles, especially battery electric vehicles, in that period. So that might have explained why the growth here in Europe at least stopped. But it continued to grow in China. It also continued to grow in the United States, although that was at a much lower level. Tesla could just simply lower their prices, and they had a lot of demand. In the United States, it's pretty much only Tesla who sells battery electric vehicles. It's 75 or something percent of the entire market in US. That's Tesla. And they were expanding despite of these high commodity prices. And China was also expanding despite of these prices. And then the price here has started to fall again. So another explanation for why we saw this price increase we have seen here for 2021, I do think that the first lithium price here that we have seen in 2021 has been demand driven. They simply wanted this lithium carbonate, so they drove the price up. But here, why did it continue to go up to these enormous levels in 2022? Well, it could be that the Chinese refiners were simply told by the CCP to raise prices to compensate China for rising prices in 2022 on commodities that China import. Because when the Ukraine war broke out here in the beginning of 2022, all commodity prices went up. But lithium had already risen quite sharply, so I don't think there was a need for it to rise further. But maybe CCP thought, okay, if they're charging that much for our imports, then let's see where we have monopolies. That would be processed lithium and also rare earth materials, and then we simply knock up prices on these things. And I think that's probably what happened. Okay, but let's go a little bit deeper of why the price of lithium is so volatile. So we can see down here, I have a chart of battery electric sales from BYD, it's a Chinese automaker, and Tesla. And these two automakers are the world's largest makers of battery electric vehicles, and it shows the quarterly sales from these automakers. The latest numbers, that's Q1 for 2023, because there are big seasonal swings in this auto market, it has to be compared with the same quarter the previous year. So if you look at the sales in Q1 2022 for both BYD and Tesla, it has increased quite strongly. So there's continued very strong growth in the global market for battery electric vehicles. And you can also see here in Q4 of 2022 also saw strong growth for both BYD and Tesla relative to Q3 the previous quarter. So the two largest battery electric makers in the world that consumes the most of this lithium carbonate, they continue to grow strongly. And despite of that, the price of lithium has been falling, which it shouldn't do. It should really just stay the same or continue to go up because of supply and demand dictates that. So I think what is happening is that it's the CCP that is dictating the prices in the market, and the shortfall in the prices of lithium carbonate, they're not so much driven by EV incentives that have been cut in Europe. They were cut over a year ago in Europe, so they should have really started to slow down the price long way back, but they actually went up. But I simply don't think that these incentives policies have affected the market as much as the CCP has. And then a final, before we leave this slide, I also think we should know that the price pattern is the same for lithium metal and also lithium hydroxide and lithium carbonate. We can see that in this graph up here, where we have the price indexes for these three refined commodities that are almost perfectly correlated. All these products are made mostly in China, as I'll come back to in some later slides. But okay, I think it's enough for this slide here. So why worry about lithium use in battery electric vehicles? Well, we saw that lithium is very expensive. That was one reason. But the other obvious reason is supply chain risk issues that are certain to arise in a world where we need to make 100 million battery electric vehicles per year by 2032, or what is equal to 914% of current global production. I made a video that would be my video number 6, where I talk about why we need to go to 100 million battery electric vehicles, and it should be possible to do it by 2032. So if you're interested in that, you can locate it easily in my channel. That was video number 6. Okay, so how much growth do we need to do every year in order to make that much materials of lithium, and also how much have we to grow our refinery and processing of that lithium every year? Well, we need to grow it by 26% annually until 2032, and I have done that down here in this table, where you can see that in 2022 we had 130 tons of lithium metal equivalent that was mined, and then grow that 26% all the years, and we'll end up with 1.3 million in 20 32. And 1.3 million, that's a little more than the 1.2 million tons of lithium metal that I have calculated we need for making 100 million battery electric vehicles. And the reason it's larger, that number, is that we also need to consider that lithium is not only used for lithium in battery electric vehicles, but we also use it for making some other stuff like ceramics and glass and lubricating greases, air treatment, and continuous casting here. This is a little table that shows how lithium was consumed in 2021. But still, batteries are the big demand driver here, and going forward, it's almost exclusively batteries that are driving demand. In fact, I think that demand from the other products are going down because the price of lithium has gone up, and so substitutes are found for lithium in other use cases. In the future, we'll also need to make batteries for grid storage, and that could actually double the demand for battery production globally. But I don't think it will be done by using lithium-ion batteries. It will be done by using natrium or sodium-ion batteries that don't contain any lithium. Also, they do not contain any copper, so they are easily scalable, these sodium-ion batteries. But the drawback is that they have far less energy density than lithium-ion batteries. They are at 160 watt-hours per kilo, whereas lithium-ion batteries typically are at 250. So they're much better suited for vehicles that needs to have low weight in order to have high efficiencies. But I'll make another video about sodium-ion batteries, and that'll be a forthcoming video. I don't want to talk more about it here in this presentation, also to keep the presentation short. Before we leave this slide, I just want to show you this table I made here. There's a lot of information in it, but here it shows again what are the raw materials we need to make one average battery electric vehicles, and then I've multiplied that with 100 million in order to get all the materials we simply need to mine in order to get enough raw materials for making 100 million battery electric vehicles. And then I have found the global production in tons of these raw materials, and then I simply take the percentage here. How much is the raw materials for making 100 million battery electric vehicles in terms of global production today, with the most recent data available that I have for this global production? And here we can see the percentages. And for lithium metal here, in lithium metal equivalent, well, we need to grow global production by 914% to meet that demand. And yeah, we need to grow it even 10x in order to also have lithium for other uses and just battery electric vehicles. But that's pretty much it for this slide here, so let's move on. So let's go a little deeper into the supply chain for lithium and refined lithium products. So there's actually low supply chain risk for lithium raw materials. It's very low because friendly countries like Australia, they make 49% of the world's production of lithium raw materials, and Chile makes 22%. And Australia, funny fact about that is that they are mining lithium-rich rocks, that would be spodumene, and Chile is mining lithium from lithium-rich brine. China here is the only risky supplier of lithium, but they only make 70% of the global raw materials output, and they use a lot more than those 70% for their own lithium processing industry. So it's not a high-risk supply chain, at least for the raw materials. And we have this table here that shows all the countries that are mining lithium or that have known reserves in lithium. Here we have the production they're doing. Not that many countries are having production. I have highlighted with yellow the risky countries. That would be China, and it's also Bolivia. Bolivia has zero production, but they have the world's largest resource. They have a massive lithium brine, the world's largest by far, that is estimated to contain 21 million tons of lithium in metal equivalents. But Bolivia is ruled by an extremist left-wing junta that dictates everything and that has tin hat ideas about how the world functions. So no investor that are sane will go into Bolivia. But then again, that's not true. I do believe actually China has made some contact with Bolivia and say they want to start lithium production in Bolivia. And I think that's fine if China does it. And that should supposedly start in 2025. But as you can see, there is quite a lot of lithium in this world. Lithium reserves, I calculated that those 21 million tons of lithium reserves that are having existing mines in operation, well, they are enough to make 1.8 billion battery electric cars. And if we do the same calculation with the resources of lithium, that's the 91 million tons of lithium down here, well, then we can make 7.7 billion battery electric vehicles with that. But the thing is, these resources of lithium on the planet, they will grow many times over in the future because of exploration and also new extraction technology. And I can just give you one example of that. Tesla here, they are currently developing a technology that should make it possible to extract lithium from lithium-rich clay. And lithium-rich clay is something that can be found many places all over the world. So if Tesla succeed in making this extraction process economic, and with the current lithium prices, I'm pretty sure they will make it economic, well, then it will double up many times from those 91 million tons that we have in resources here. In 10 years from now, it could be 500 million tons of lithium resources if this clay technology is commercialized. And another example, I haven't put it into my presentation here, I can just remember it from my head, is that seawater actually contains lithium. So if you can make an economic way of getting lithium out of seawater, well, then we have enough lithium for hundreds of billions of electric cars to make. It's really not a problem with finding lithium here on this planet. There's plenty of it, but I think that's enough for this table here. Okay, so the supply risk for the raw materials was not high, but that changes completely when we look at the supply chain risk for making lithium-ion batteries or for making the materials that goes into lithium-ion batteries and that are based on lithium. Supply chain risk for lithium-ion battery production is extremely high, as China makes almost 80% of all such batteries in 2021. And as I just said, China also do all the associated processing and refinery of battery materials like lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide, and also pure lithium metal. The world in 2023 are critically dependent on China's willingness to supply its batteries for BEVs, smartphone, mobile computers, and a lot of other products that are using these lithium-ion batteries. And to repeat, China also makes nearly all the profit in this supply chain, as the cost of making lithium carbonate is 30,000 yuan per ton, but they are currently selling it for 230,000 yuan per ton, while the miners get almost nothing. I don't know how much the miners get, probably get 10,000 yuan per ton. In the rest of the world, we make almost nothing making lithium raw materials, and China is reaping an enormous profit from making their batteries and also all the materials that goes into these batteries. So obviously, for both security reasons and economic reasons, the free world in particular, they all need to make its own lithium-ion batteries and battery materials. So what can we do to end China's lithium-ion battery monopoly? The United States have certainly taken it seriously and started doing their own legislation, and Europe also on it, but not as much as the United States. But really what all countries need to do, it's a very simple thing. They need to pass legislation that require battery materials and cell production to be localized. So North America, EU, Japan, South Korea, etc. all need to pass this legislation requiring that battery cells and materials are localized, and then face this legislation in over, say, 5 years, with the end year being 2028 as a year where all battery materials and cell production should be 100% localized. No longer any imports from China is allowed. That might seem a little harsh from my side, but I'm not harsh. I want to make compromises, because I think the world will be a lot better off if we allow each other to invest in factories in each other's countries. So the two largest producers of batteries in the world, that would be BYD and then CATL, that's by far the largest lithium battery producer in the world. They should be allowed to set up fully owned factories in the free world and elsewhere in the world. And then we should require also that China allow Western companies to set up fully owned factories in China. Tesla was actually the first company in the West that was allowed to set up a factory that was fully owned for making battery electric vehicles. And I think that's actually a good thing. In order to make it happen a lot faster, making all these batteries, we should definitely invite BYD and CATL in and have them set up some factories. They have all the people who know how this is done, and it will be done much faster if we do it like that. And the same way for China. they can also get a lot done faster. Of course, China wanted Tesla to come in and set up a battery electric vehicle because they knew Tesla was a leader in making battery electric vehicles, and they want to get the know-how from how this is done the most effectively, and they could do that by inviting Tesla into China and to start manufacturing. So I think both China and the West will be much better off in terms of growth and also peace if we continue to transfer technology and also investment. But we cannot rely on China's products for imports. But what I think we should do is just make business still together with investments and technology transfer and also with tourism. And I think if we are mutually invested in each other, that's also an incentive to keep the peace so we don't go to war with each other. Because if we have invested trillions of dollars in factories in China and China has invested trillions of dollars in other countries, well, to start a war, we know that what will happen then next is that these trillions of dollars will just be confiscated, expropriated by law, and then you lose the profit streams that comes from these investments. But really, we can have a much higher growth rate if we are mutually invested in each other. So on this issue, I am more liberal than other people who say we should have nothing to do with China, we shouldn't have any trade with them, nor should we have any investments from them, nor should we invest in China and so forth. If we do that, I can guarantee you that we will have a lower living standard globally, not just in China, but also in the rest of the world. So I think we should still, in order to preserve prosperity and higher economic growth, we should still invest in each other's countries and transfer technology around. And I also think it will preserve the peace, which is important, that we don't go to war. That would be the dumbest thing humanity can ever do. That would be to go to war like Russia has just done in Ukraine. It's incredibly stupid of Russia to do something like that. But anyway, that's enough about this slide here, I think. Okay, so let's consider the supply chain risk for raw materials, and let's consider specifically the question of, is it hard to mine 10x the production of raw materials for lithium before 2032? And my answer to that is a clear no, because we only need to mine the equivalent of 60 million tons of spodumene ore at 2% lithium content to make 100 million battery electric vehicles per year. Then you could say it's 60 million tons, that sounds like a lot, but actually it's only 1.5% of what we mine for iron ore in 2021. So we only need the mining capacity for trucks and excavators equal to 1.5% of what we currently use for mining iron ore in order to make enough lithium for 100 million battery electric vehicles per year. So it's actually quite tiny. And the other thing is that battery electric vehicles, they can be recycled. So eventually much less mining is needed. When all these used battery electric vehicles come back, well, then you take the battery out and you start recycling the battery into new materials for making new battery packs for new battery electric vehicles. So much less is actually needed than those 60 million tons of spodumene for making 100 million battery electric vehicles. And also, eventually the world is going towards being powered completely by solar and wind power. And that will of course end 16,000 million tons of mining for extracting coal, gas and oil that will simply not be needed. And we can see it in this table here that I have made. It took me a little while to get all this information and calculate it so it was calculated correctly. But it shows the scale of global raw materials industry by size in tons and also in US dollar revenue. And here you have the material type and you have all the types of materials down. And you have coal here, that's 8 billion tons of coal is mined in 2021. And oil, I've calculated how many tons of oil is extracted. It's 4.2 billion tons of coal and also in 2021. And gas, when you calculate that as tons, it will be 3.9 billion tons. So that sum that up and then you have those 16 billion tons of mining and extracting for this. And compare those 16,000 million tons to 60 million tons for spodumene for lithium. It's tiny, it's nothing. We will actually, in the future, we will see a lot less mining and extraction of raw materials in an economy that's completely renewable because we won't need as much mining to do the materials that are needed for making solar and wind power and all the batteries needed and battery electric vehicles. And also these 16,000 million tons of fossil fuels here, they cannot be recycled you have to do that year after year, same amount. Whereas with all the other materials for solar and wind and stuff, you can, when all that is used up and it has to be decommissioned, well, then you take the batteries and the materials out and basically recycle it into new solar, new wind power, new battery electric vehicles. So it'll be far less. So I think that's enough for this table. Maybe I should say below this video, there's a link to an Excel spreadsheet where you can download this table, and I have linked to pages on the web where you can find all these data here. And also in the Excel spreadsheet, I have all the calculations. I had to make a lot of calculations and conversions in order to get these numbers out here, because these numbers cannot be found directly anywhere on the web. For instance, how do you find that gas is 3.9 billion tons? Well, you have to do a lot of calculation to figure that out. And also the price in kilo of US dollar per kilo for natural gas, something you also have to do a little calculation in order to get it. Before completely leaving this slide here, I should also say I've calculated the size of these industries in global sales per million US dollar. And as you can see, even this for lithium metal, the size is actually only, even at these extremely high prices for lithium that China is charging, still the global industry here, global sales of lithium is only 24 billion US dollars, which is a very tiny industry, for instance, compared to iron ore, that's 500 billion US dollars, or crude steel. You take this iron ore and then you make crude steel from it, and that's 1,200 billion dollars. And here you can see the largest industry is really oil. That's a 2.3 trillion dollar industry, and gas is a 1.9 trillion dollar industry. Now here I have used the price I used for gas is UK natural gas price, and that price is the price that UK pays, and it's also similar to the price that continental Europe pays, and also prices outside in Asia. But in some countries like United States, the gas price is only 1/4 of that. In the United States, they use a lot of natural gas. So of course, this industry is not actually having sales of 1.9 trillion US dollars. It will be less than that because some countries like United States do not pay as much for natural gas as the UK does. But I had to pick a number, so that's how I calculated it. And also I can say the same goes for coal. Here I use Newcastle Europe coal price, which is 200 US dollar per ton of coal. In United States, that coal is trading for like 50 US dollar per ton, but in Europe it's $200, and also in Asia it's $200 per ton. If you go inside China and inside India, well, they probably mine it also for 50 US dollar per ton. So again, this 1.5 trillion dollars for the global coal industry, it's too much. It's only if you use these 200 US dollar per ton. But otherwise, all the prices I have here is pretty much the turnover that is in that industry globally, because the price is actually trading for the prices I have used here. Okay, now I think I'll finish this slide. So the second question we have to ask is, can the world 10x production of lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide for making enough batteries for making 100 million battery electric vehicles annually by 2032? And again, here my answer is yes, we can definitely do that, because we are still talking very small quantities of chemical processing of spodumene ore here at 2%. It's what we need to do is mine 60 million, and we need to turn that into 1.2 million tons of pure lithium. And for example, copper production today, here we mine 4,240 million tons of that, turning that into 21 million tons of pure copper. And other industries down here, so iron ore, we have 4 billion tons of that, and it's turned into 2 billion tons of steel. And also aluminium, that's also a big one. 380 million tons of that is turned into 68 million tons of pure aluminium. So it's tiny amounts of lithium ore that we have to refine, and that's why we can easily make it before 2032. And China could do it alone if the free world was stupid enough to let them do it. But obviously the free world should definitely not let China do it, because we know what will happen if we do that. Then we'll lose our freedom here in our part of the world, because China's CCP, they'll just start dictating what we have to think and say. And if we don't do it, they can always shut down our economy if we refuse to do as we are told. And we definitely don't want to live in a world where China is dictating what everybody is allowed to think and say. So we have to do this ourselves in order to preserve our freedom. Another reason for doing it, besides preserving our freedom, is that we will make a lot more money doing the battery materials and battery cells ourselves, because China is sometimes hiking up the price hugely, as we saw there with lithium carbonate that were selling at 600,000 yuan when it only cost them 30,000 yuan per ton to make the lithium carbonate. Again, our praise to Tesla for taking the lead here. Tesla is now building a large-scale lithium hydroxide refinery in Texas, and they're also building a cathode and cell manufacturing factory in Austin, Texas, and they're going to import the spodumene for that production to the refinery. That's going to be imported from a newly opened mine in Quebec, Canada. So that will be one of the first large-scale productions of these battery materials outside of China. And of course, we should have a lot more of that going on also in Europe and other places in Asia like South Korea and Japan. Okay, then all we have to say here is that I have sources and attribution for my previous slides. I have made this slide here with clickable links to all the claims I have made, all the numbers I have provided. And there's also another Excel spreadsheet where there are more links and also shows how I've calculated some of the numbers that are not readily available on the internet if you Google it or ask Bing AI for these things. Plus, you can't truly believe that Bing AI give you the right number. You have to check it. This Bing AI thing, that's a big thing. It really is. Started here this month or previous months, and I've been using it ever since. You should use it, really. It's more important than this video. Start using it. My next video will analyze the nickel supply chain for lithium-ion batteries in the same way I just did it for lithium in this video. So if you want to see my next video on nickel, then consider subscribing to my channel so it will end up in your YouTube feed. Thank you for watching my video. I wish you a healthy and fulfilling life in freedom and democracy.